The morning Frances Osgood left London, the Thames was the color of pewter, and the air smelled of salt and coal smoke, and the particular cold that comes off moving water before the sun has had any say in the matter. She stood on the dock with her traveling cloak pulled close, and her case of botanical illustrations held against her chest, not handed to a porter, not set down on the planking, held, while the trunk containing everything else she owned was hoisted by rope and disappeared into the belly of the ship. A gull screamed somewhere above her. A length of mooring rope dropped against the hull with a hollow, definitive sound. Frances did not look at the city behind her. She watched the water, and in the space between one breath and the next, a door swung open in her memory. Not a door she had pushed, but one she had simply been passing. And James Fairfax's voice came through it again, low and unhurried. The way a man speaks when he is saying nothing he considers remarkable. I find her repulsive. Not angry, not cruel in the way that requires effort, stated as he might state the direction of the wind or the likelihood of rain. She had not stopped walking. She had continued down the corridor and up the stairs and into her room, and she had sat at her desk for 2 hours without lighting another candle. And then she had written a letter to Edinburgh. Now the gangplank was rising behind her. She felt it, did not turn to watch it go. She had attended 3 dinners at the Fairfax townhouse in Mayfair, introduced through a family connection whose name she would later find it difficult to say aloud, not from bitterness, but from the particular embarrassment of having believed the introduction meant something. The connection had presented her as a woman of education and accomplishment, and the word accomplishment had landed in the room with the soft, cushioned weight of a word that everyone in it understood to mean something other than what it said. The first dinner she had sat 2 seats from James Fairfax and spoken mostly to the woman on her left about the progress of the Chelsea Physic Garden's new catalogue. James had listened. She had caught him doing it twice, his attention sliding away from the conversation on his right and settling on her with a quality she could not quite name. Not appraisal. Something more alert than that. At the second dinner, he had been seated beside her, and they had spoken for 40 minutes about the classification problems in the Linnaean system, and why her monograph had proposed an alternative arrangement for 3 of the Highland specimens. He had asked specific questions. She had answered them without softening the complexity, waiting for him to lose interest, and he had not lost interest. The botanical journal had appeared at the 3rd dinner. He had brought it to the table, his own copy, she noticed, with pencil marks in the margin, and passed it across to her when the conversation turned to the reissue of her monograph. She reached for it. His fingers were still at the corner of the cover when hers arrived, and she withdrew her hand a half-second before they could touch. He noticed. She noticed that he noticed. She told herself, with the quiet firmness she'd spent years cultivating, that it meant nothing, that the precision of his attention was a social habit, that a man of his position noticing her was a different thing from a man of his position choosing her, and that she had learned, from her mother, from her years in London drawing rooms, from the slow education of being a physician's daughter with a dead father and no fortune, to keep those 2 things firmly separate in her mind. She had not kept them separate. That was what it cost her to admit in the 2 hours she sat at her desk after passing the open study door. She had let the dinners mean something. She had let herself believe that the pencil marks in the margin and the specific questions and the way his hand had not moved from the corner of the journal were evidence of something real. She had been wrong, and the wrongness was not the worst of it. The worst was that she had known better and chosen not to know. The letter to Edinburgh took 11 minutes to write. She had drafted it once before, 6 weeks earlier, when the Royal Botanic Garden had offered her the scientific post, and she had sat for a long time looking at it, and then written a polite, careful letter of decline, telling herself that a London future was still possible. The second letter took no drafting at all. She wrote it in a clean hand, sealed it, and set it on the corner of the desk. An hour after she had passed the study door, a knock came. She opened it to find Edmund Fairfax, James's younger brother, quieter, with the same dark eyes but a different quality behind them, standing in the corridor holding a copy of the Botanical Journal. His own copy. He held it out to her without a word. She took it. He looked at her steadily for a moment, and then he nodded once and walked away. And she understood, without either of them having said a single thing, that he had been in the study. Edmund's letter arrived that same afternoon. It contained the exact words his brother had used, all of them in Edmund's careful hand. And the information stated plainly at the bottom that Edmund had left the room without speaking. He had not told James he was going to write to her. He did not say whether he intended to tell James anything at all. He signed it with his name and nothing else. Frances read the letter twice. Then she set it in the desk drawer beneath the Botanical Journal and went to book the passage north. The ship left the Thames on a gray morning, the city falling away behind her in layers. First the docks, then the bridges, then the pale smear of the skyline, then nothing but the estuary and the cold. Frances stood on deck for 1 hour. She had intended to go below after 10 minutes, but she stayed because the cold was useful, and the gray water required nothing of her. And there was no one else on deck to see what happened in the second half of that hour. She gripped the railing and let herself feel the full weight of it. The dinners, the journal passed across the table, the specific questions, the half-second before she had withdrawn her hand. And then the voice through the open door. Unhurried, not cruel, simply accurate in the way that a man is accurate about something he has already decided. She let herself feel it, and it was considerable. And she did not perform composure for the empty deck and the gray water. She allowed her face to do what it needed to do for exactly as long as it took. Then the cold helped, and she straightened, and she went below, and she did not break again. Edinburgh received her without ceremony, which suited her. The Royal Botanic Garden Laboratory was a long room with north-facing windows and the smell of specimen paper and the particular mineral cold of Scottish winter pressing against the glass. Her supervisor, Dr. Anstruther, a compact man of 60 with ink on his left cuff, showed her the workspace and the specimen cabinet and the current state of the plates for the monograph's second edition. Then he set a letter on the desk in front of her. "From the board," he said, "regarding the reissue." She read it. The reissue would carry her full name, not the initials F.O. under which the first edition had been published. The full name, Miss Frances Osgood, on the title page and in the Society's catalogue. "The board feels," Dr. Anstruther said, "that the monograph's reception has been sufficiently strong to warrant the attribution." There was no dissent. Frances set the letter down on the desk. She was aware of something shifting in her chest, not dramatically, not with the force of the hour on the ship's deck, but quietly, like a drawer sliding properly into its groove after years of catching. "Thank you," she said. "It is your work, Miss Osgood," Dr. Anstruther said, already turning back toward the specimen cabinet. "The name belongs with it." She picked up her pen. Edinburgh in winter had a quality she had not anticipated. It was honest. The cold was honest. The light was honest, low and white and unsparing, arriving through the glasshouse panels and illuminating every imprecision in a drawing with the impartiality of a court. She worked in the laboratory in the mornings and the glasshouse in the afternoons, building the illustrated plates for the second edition with a focused precision that had always been present in her work. But that felt, now, like something she was doing for herself, rather than to prove something to someone who was not in the room. James wrote in the 4th week. She recognized his hand on the envelope. She had seen it once, on a note passed to Dr. Anstruther at the second dinner. And she set the letter on the corner of the desk and looked at it for a moment before opening it. It was formal, stilted in the way that a man is stilted when he is trying to write something that his social vocabulary does not quite contain. He inquired after her health. He mentioned the weather. He said in the 3rd paragraph that he hoped Edinburgh was proving, he used the word congenial, which told her everything about how much distance he was maintaining from what he actually meant. She read it through to the end. Then she set it on the desk and returned to the plates and did not answer it. Edmund came twice. On his first visit, he appeared at the laboratory door on a Tuesday afternoon with his coat still damp from the journey and the look of a man who had calculated the inconvenience and decided it was beside the point. He walked with her through the glass house, the long central aisle with the highland specimens on the left and the lowland varieties banked along the right wall in their winter dormancy. The cold came in through the gaps in the frame along the north end, and Frances had learned to work in her gloves. Edmund walked beside her and placed himself, without drawing attention to it, between her and the draft, just slightly, the way a man shifts his position without appearing to choose it. And they spoke about the plates and the Latin classification and the board's decision about her name on the reissue. And neither of them mentioned his brother until they were nearly at the far end. "He wrote to you," Edmund said. "Yes," Frances said. "You didn't reply?" "No," she said. Edmund considered this. "I won't ask you to," he said. She appreciated that more than she would have been able to say cleanly, so she said nothing and turned to examine the Saxifraga specimen on the right. And they stood there for a moment in the cold glasshouse light. And then they walked back. His second visit came 6 weeks later. He arrived on a Wednesday, and this time he came directly to the laboratory and sat in the chair across the desk without preamble. He read the monograph, Edmund said. Frances set down her pen. "All of it," Edmund said. "He had me read the Latin passages aloud, the ones in the appendix." A pause. "He is learning the Latin names." The laboratory was very quiet. The specimen cabinet behind her ticked once as the temperature shifted. Frances looked at the plate she had been working on. The cover specimen, the highland plant she had drawn in secret over 3 years before the first edition, signed with initials only because her publisher had told her the full name would complicate the reception. And she did not pick up her pen again for a long time. "I see," she said finally. Edmund said nothing else. He seemed to understand that he had delivered something that required space. And he gave her the space. And after a while they spoke about other things. And he left before dark to find lodgings before the cold settled in. 2 nights after Edmund's second visit, Frances was at her desk at 9:30 when the knock came. She opened the door to find him again, travel damp again, a different coat, the same expression of a man who had decided the inconvenience was not the point. "You've come back," she said. "I have something to say that a letter couldn't carry," Edmund said. "May I come in?" She stepped back. He came in and stood near the fire and did not sit, which told her this would not be a long conversation, only a necessary one. "I gave you the journal that morning," he said, "because I could not carry what I had heard by myself. I want you to know that. It was not entirely for your sake. I needed someone else to know, and you were the one who had the right to know it." "I understand," Frances said. "I haven't spoken to him since," Edmund said. "Not a single substantive word. He doesn't know why. He thinks I'm angry on principle." He looked at the fire. "I am angry on principle. But that's not all of it." Frances waited. "There is one more thing," Edmund said, "that I didn't put in the letter. I didn't know how to put it in a letter." He looked at her directly. The word he used, repulsive, it wasn't about your worth. It was a sentence he told himself about an attraction he didn't know what to do with. He is a man who has sorted everything in his life into categories of practical and impractical. And you are, the most impractical thing he has ever wanted. So he named it something else, something he could dismiss. That is what I heard in the study. Not contempt, fear, dressed in contempt's clothes. The fire shifted. A coal settled. Frances stood very still, her hands at her sides. "I am telling you this," Edmund said carefully, "not to argue for him. I am not here to argue for him. I am telling you because you are carrying a verdict that was never about you. And I think you deserve to know what it actually was." Frances was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Edmund, I want to be clear about something." "Of course," he said. "I do not require his desire to have been real in order to survive his contempt," she said. "Whether the word came from fear or from genuine dismissal, I heard it spoken without hesitation, in a voice that expected no consequence. That is what I am living with, not the interpretation of it." Edmund nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I know. But I thank you," she said, "for coming, for the letter, for the journal that morning." She looked at him steadily. "You could have said nothing. Most men would have said nothing." "I know that too," Edmund said. He left shortly after. Frances sat at her desk for a long time after the door closed, the fire burning down, the plate of the Highland specimen open in front of her. Something had loosened in her chest, not resolved, not healed, but loosened. The way a knot yields slightly when you stop pulling against it and simply work at it with patience. She had said what it cost her, plainly, to another person, and the world had not ended, and she was still herself. And that, she thought, was something she had not been certain of until tonight. The Dowager Viscountess Fairfax arrived in Edinburgh on the afternoon of Frances's Botanical Society lecture, with no prior communication and no explanation. And Frances was informed of her presence by the Society secretary, who appeared at the anteroom door 20 minutes before the lecture was to begin with the expression of a man who had been asked to relay information he did not fully understand. "There is a Lady Fairfax," he said, "in the corridor. She's asking to speak with you before you go in." Frances set down her notes. "Show her in," she said. The dowager was a woman of perhaps 65, upright, dressed in traveling clothes that were expensive in the way that does not require announcement, with eyes that took in the anteroom and its contents. The specimen plate stacked on the table, the monograph open to the cover page, Frances herself, with a single, comprehensive look. "Miss Osgood," the dowager said. She did not sit. "Lady Fairfax," Frances said. "My younger son sent me the monograph," the Dowager said. "6 weeks ago. I have read it." She paused. "The section on Saxifraga hypnoides is particularly strong. Your argument for the reclassification is more persuasive than anything I have read on the subject, and I have been reading natural history for 40 years. Frances said, "Thank you." "I have a question," the Dowager said. "The specimen illustrated on the cover, you note in the appendix that it was collected at a specific elevation on the eastern slope. The plate suggests the basal leaves are unusually robust for that altitude. Did the conditions of the collection site account for that? Or is this a characteristic of the population?" It was a genuine question. Frances recognized genuine questions. She had answered enough false ones to know the difference. And she answered it fully, describing the microclimate of the site and the soil composition and the 3-year pattern she had observed before drawing the final plate. The Dowager listened without interrupting. When Frances finished, she said, "I thought so. The plate suggested it, but I wanted to hear you confirm it." She picked up her gloves from the table where she had set them. "In parting, Miss Osgood, my son James has been asking where you went." She did not wait for a response. She walked to the door, and then she stopped with her hand on the frame. "The lecture is well subscribed," she said. "I understand the room is full." And she went out. Frances stood in the anteroom for a moment. Then she picked up her notes and walked through the door and gave the lecture to 43 people under her full name without faltering, from the first sentence to the last. That night, alone at her lodgings with the fire lit and the city quiet outside, she wrote 2 letters. The first to Dr. Anstruther, declining the post extension with genuine gratitude and specific acknowledgement of what Edinburgh had given her. The second to the London Botanical Society, accepting the invitation to lecture, the invitation that had been sitting in her correspondence for 3 weeks, under the name Miss Frances Osgood. She sealed both letters and set them on the desk. Then she sat for a while longer, looking at nothing in particular, aware that she had made a decision that she had not consciously known she was making, until the moment the Dowager walked out of the anteroom. She was going back to London. Not because James Fairfax had been asking where she went. Because London had a room with her name over the door, and she intended to walk into it. London in early autumn was amber and gray, the plane trees beginning to turn, the mornings carrying the first real edge of cold. Frances returned to her lodgings in Bloomsbury and resumed the work on the plates for the final week before delivery to the printer. And her return was noted in the way that the return of a woman who has done something interesting is always noted. With a mixture of attention and repositioning, people recalibrating where she fit in the arrangement. At a society gathering in the 3rd week, a hostess named Mrs. Clavering, a woman of meticulous social architecture who had been present at all 3 of the Fairfax dinners, said, within Frances's hearing and not quite to her face, that ambition in a woman of Miss Osgood's background was, of course, a compensation for what she cannot otherwise offer. Frances heard it. She was standing 4 feet away, holding a cup of tea she had not yet drunk, and she heard every word. She looked at Mrs. Clavering with a pleasant expression and said nothing. She finished her tea. She spoke to 2 other guests about matters of no consequence, and then she went home and sat at her desk and was aware, with a clarity that surprised her, that Mrs. Clavering's sentence had slid off her like water off a specimen jar. She noted this. It seemed important. The preliminary lecture was held on a Thursday evening in late September. 40 people in a long room with candles along the side tables, and the society's secretary at the door with a list. Frances stood at the front and spoke for 50 minutes about the classification methodology of the second edition. And the room was attentive. And at the back, near the door, James Fairfax stood with his hat in his hands and did not approach her afterward. He wrote the next morning. The fourth letter was different from the first three in the way that a man is different when he has stopped maintaining the distance that formality provides. He wrote that the word he had used in the study had not been about her. He wrote that he understood this was not a sufficient statement, and that he did not offer it as an apology or as an explanation that resolved anything, but as a fact he needed her to have. He did not ask to see her. He asked, at the bottom of the letter, whether he might attend the full lecture. Frances read it at her desk, the morning light coming through the window onto the paper. She took a sheet, dipped her pen, and wrote one word. She folded it, sealed it, and sent it with the morning post. The word was yes. At the full lecture, he was at the back again. The room held 52 people this time, and Frances stood at the front and delivered the work. The methodology, the plates, the classification argument, the Highland specimens in their proper Latin. And she did not look at the back of the room because she did not need to, and because the work deserved her full attention, and she gave it. Afterward, in the corridor, with the other attendees moving past them toward the door, James approached her. He was not what she had been preparing for. He was quieter than she remembered, and the formality that had characterized his letters was not entirely gone, but had become something different, something more like effort than armor. "The plates," he said. "May I see them?" She held the case out. He took it carefully and opened it to the first plate, the cover specimen, the Highland plant. He looked at it for a long time. She stepped closer to point to the detail in the lower left corner, the basal leaf structure she had spent 6 sittings getting right. And her hand was an inch from his, as on the edge of the plate. Neither of them pulled back. Neither of them spoke of it. The corridor moved around them, and they stood there for a moment in the middle of it. Her hand an inch from his, the plate between them, and the air was very still. Edmund came to tea the evening before the drawing-room meeting. He arrived at 6:30 and stayed until the clock on the mantelpiece struck 10, and for 3.5 hours he sat in the chair across from her and drank 2 cups of tea and talked about Edinburgh, the glasshouse, the winter specimens, a paper Dr. Anstruther was preparing on the lowland Saxifraga. And he did not argue for his brother. He did not explain his brother. He did not ask Frances what she intended to do when she saw him tomorrow. And she did not tell him. At one point, around 9 o'clock, he said, "The man who comes tomorrow is not the one who spoke through the study door. I am not saying that to persuade you of anything. I am saying it because it is accurate, and you deserve accurate information." "I know," Frances said. "How do you know?" Edmund asked. "The fourth letter," she said. "The register of it. A man defending himself sounds different from a man who has stopped defending." Edmund considered this. "Yes," he said. "That's right." When the clock struck 10, he stood and put on his coat and picked up his hat. At the door he turned. "Frances," he said, her given name, the first time, and she did not remark on it. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, it was right what you did. Edinburgh, the name on the monograph, all of it. It was the correct thing." "I know that too," she said. After he left, she sat at her desk with the illustrated plates open in front of her, the cover specimen in the lamplight. The Highland plant she had drawn in secret over 3 years, published first under initials, reissued now under her name. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the dock at dawn, the rope against the hull, the grey water. She thought about the glass house in Edinburgh, the white winter light, Dr. Anstruther saying, "The name belongs with it," as though it were the simplest thing in the world. She thought about Edmund walking beside her in the cold aisle, placing himself between her and the draught, without remark. She thought about the corridor after the lecture, her hand an inch from James's on the edge of the plate, and the stillness of the air. She was not afraid of tomorrow. That was the thing she noticed, sitting at the desk with the lamplight on the plates. She was not afraid. Whatever happened in the drawing room would happen to a woman who had stood on a ship's deck in the first hour and let herself break, and then had not broken again. Who had delivered a lecture in Edinburgh under her own name to a room that meant it as a credential. Who had heard a hostess say the worst thing available to her and had felt it slide away like water off glass. Whatever James Fairfax said tomorrow, she would hear it from that place. And whatever she decided, it would be hers. The Fairfax drawing room at autumn dusk was lit by the fire and 2 lamps on the mantelpiece, and the other guests had departed 40 minutes earlier, and James had stayed. He was standing when she came back into the room. She had been speaking to the society secretary in the hall, and he did not sit when she entered, which she understood as a kind of honesty about the weight of the conversation they were about to have. "Thank you for staying," he said. "I said I would," Frances replied. She sat in the chair nearest the fire, not because she was cold, but because it gave her somewhere to be, while he found his way to what he needed to say. He did not sit. He stood near the window with the dusk behind him, and he said, "I am going to tell you what happened, and I am not going to apologize first, because an apology first would be a way of managing your response before I've given you the full account. Will you allow that?" "Yes," Frances said. "3 weeks after you left," James said. "Edmund put the monograph on my desk. He didn't say anything. He set it down and walked out. I left it there for 4 days. He stopped. Then I read it." Frances waited. "I read all of it," he said, "including the appendix, including the Latin, which I had to have Edmund read aloud to me because my Latin has not been exercised in 15 years. Something shifted in his face. Not quite amusement, not quite grief. "I have been learning the names, the Latin binomials. I started with the cover specimen because it seemed like the right place to start." "Why?" Frances said. He looked at her directly. "Because I needed to understand what I had dismissed," he said. "What the word I used had dismissed. I told my brother I found you repulsive, Frances. And what I meant, what I was actually doing, was constructing a verdict about something I didn't know what to do with. You were not a practical possibility in my accounting. So I named what I felt about you something that would make the impracticality irrelevant." He paused. The monograph made the accounting irrelevant instead. I read it, and I understood that I had been wrong about the specific thing I cannot afford to have been wrong about. The fire shifted. A lamp guttered slightly in a draught from the window and steadied. "I am not asking your forgiveness," James said. "I don't think I've earned it. I am asking whether you will allow me to know you, as you are, as you have always been, as the monograph and Edinburgh and the lecture tonight have made plainly visible to anyone willing to look. I am asking whether that is a thing you would permit." Frances looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Before I answer that, I want to ask you something." "Ask," he said. "The species on the monograph's cover," she said. "Name it, without help. The full Latin binomial, the common name, and the location of the specimen." Something moved through his expression. He had not expected the test, and she watched him recognize that it was not a game, that it was the thing on which everything rested. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Saxifraga oppositifolia," he said. "Purple saxifrage, collected on the eastern slope of a highland ridge in Perthshire, at approximately 2,000 feet, in the 3rd week of May." He paused. "You note in the appendix that the basal leaves are more robust than is typical at that altitude. The plate took 6 sittings. The fire, the 2 lamps, the dusk behind him through the window." Frances stood. She did not move toward him immediately. She stood and looked at him, and he bore the look without flinching, which was the last thing she needed to see. "If you intend to know me," she said, "I will not make myself smaller for it. Not my opinions, not my work, not my name. I will not go back to initials for the sake of anyone's comfort, including yours." "I know," he said. "I mean it as a condition," she said, "not a preference." "Frances," he said, and his voice was different, quieter, stripped of the register he used when he was managing something. "I am counting on it." She crossed the room. She kissed him once, without ceremony, without waiting for him to make the move. Her choice, her initiation, brief and clear and entirely deliberate. He was very still under it, and then he was not still. And when she stepped back in, his expression was the expression of a man who has been wrong about the most important thing and has been given, against all reasonable expectation, the chance to be right. 6 months later, the glass house on the north side of the Fairfax townhouse had been converted. It was a proper working space now, with a long bench along the south wall and specimen shelves along the north. And the morning light came through the glass in long, pale bars that moved across the work table as the sun climbed. 2 sets of botanical drawings lay on the table, hers precise and fully signed, and his rougher, learning. The Latin labels written in a hand that had been practicing. On the corner of the table, attached to the pot containing the Highland specimen she had brought from Edinburgh, the Saxifraga oppositifolia from Perthshire. The one from the cover, growing now in London soil with careful attention to elevation and drainage, and the particular cold it preferred, was a small paper label. The species name was written in her handwriting, the location and collection date beneath it, and at the bottom, countersigning the label in his own hand, his name. The door to the garden stood open. The morning came in,